Hey everybody, welcome to the broadcast. We do have some breaking news here, and it's significant breaking news, and that is the International Criminal Court, which has flirted with this idea of doing this investigation of Israel. The prosecutor's leaving. We've talked about that before. Her term is up. But now, she announced yesterday that, in fact, she is going to begin this investigation of Israel for potential war crimes. Now, let me say first, and I'll go to Wes Smith on this before we get into the particulars. I have to say this right up front. The United States State Department has issued a fantastic statement. I know this is coming as a shock to everybody that's listening to this broadcast. But what it really means is that your voice matters. We take a position, it makes a difference. And I'm going to read you that statement once we explain everything, but we got to explain it. So the International Criminal Court is trying to bring up Israeli soldiers on war crimes. But yet the State Department has pushed back. But what we've got here with this war crime, you're a soldier. Mm-hmm. This is very dangerous for these individual soldiers because it's not against the state. Right. It's against the soldiers.
They can arrest individual Israeli soldiers and other Israeli officials. This is much like what happened last year, Jay, that you were involved in at the ICC, yep, when they wanted to bring and investigate United States soldiers in Afghanistan on similar kinds of alleged war crimes, knowing that while Afghanistan is a signatory of the Rome Statute, a member of the ICC, we are not. The same with Israel. Israel did not sign the Rome Statute. They're not part of the ICC. They do not fall under that. And yet, at the same time, they're trying to give the Palestinian state status, which they don't have at the UN, in order to try and arrest Israelis and investigate them for war crimes. It is a real atrocity of justice.
So let me tell you what's happened. The International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor has, in fact, launched. So they have begun the investigation into these alleged war crimes in what they call the Palestinian territories. It's a lengthy statement from the prosecutor. She's leaving. There's a new prosecutor coming in. The State Department, Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, has issued a very strong statement, not only condemning the ICC for what they've done, but supporting Israel. Now, you're going to say, and let me go to Andy on this. People are going to say, I can't even believe that's happened. Why would they do that? Well, because the success of the previous administration, President Trump, as it relates to the establishment of relationships with these other Arab countries in the Abraham Accords, has made a big difference. And in a sense, I think the Biden administration is probably going to try to build on that.
Well, it seems like that's the case. I really applaud Secretary Blinken for the statement that he made. When I read it, I was dumbfounded because of the strength of the statement that it made in support of Israel and against this decision of the International Criminal Court, which, by the way, was a 2-1 decision. It was a decision that had a strong dissent by one of the judges from Poland, I believe it was, who made an excellent dissent saying that the ICC had no jurisdiction, the prosecutor, to get involved in investigating Israel because Israel is not, as Colonel Smith said, a signatory to the Rome Statute, which created the ICC. But I was very pleased, and I think you're right, Jay. What Blinken's statement, the Secretary of State of the United States, builds upon is what President Trump established in the Middle East, and they're not retreating from that. And I'm glad to see the Biden administration taking that strong position in favor of Israel.
Folks, we're going to get into the statement. Fan, really quickly, we got like 30 seconds here. Speaking out makes a difference.
It makes a difference, especially on this issue, Jay, because the Democrat base, they agree with us on this. They want to stand by Israel. They want security in the Middle East. We can win on these issues, Jay.
Folks, this is a big win. I mean, this is a shocking win. I am very glad to be saying this. But this comes while Iran is saying that the world will kneel before Iran and will lift sanctions because of the defeat of President Trump, or what they call the defeat of President Trump at the polls. We'll get into that as well. Don't forget, ACLJ.org matching challenge campaign. That's why we have an office in Jerusalem, folks. ACLJ.org. All right, so the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has begun, not just issued. They talked about they had jurisdiction. They made that decision a couple of weeks ago, and now they've actually opened up this investigation against Israel, which is ridiculous and very dangerous. But the United States, even with this administration, has recognized the danger of it. Now, I will say that we talked about this early on, and I want to go back to Than because we only had a few seconds there. And Than, we talked about this when it was first developing, it was first breaking, and we said, we need to speak out on this. We issued statements. We issued legal analysis. I know that we've been contacting members of Congress. Of course, we had Mike Pompeo, who is now our senior counsel of global affairs, and Rick Grenell, the former director of national intelligence, ambassador to Germany, also senior advisor to the ACLJ, all on our team now. And we were very aggressive about this, Stan, that the United States needed to condemn this. And we were also very concerned that they would not.
Yeah, and the news today, Jay, is exactly why we engaged in that particular strategy. Look, we were upfront with our members. We've been upfront with everyone we've talked to on this, that we're going to have many disagreements with this administration, largely because they're bringing in the same people that had the same failed policy the last time around. But, Jay, let me just give people a glimpse into the political lens and why we took this particular strategy. While the left in Washington, D.C. is sort of by instinct in the wrong place on this issue, Jay, large swaths of the voting base of the American people, including, by the way, on the left, definitely inside the Democrat Party, Jay, they're with us on this. They want to stand with our allies in the Middle East. They want to expand on agreements like the Abraham Accords. They want to see peace and prosperity throughout the region, and they want the American word to mean something across the world, especially to our allies. So that puts the politicians in Washington, D.C. in a little bit of an interesting place, Jay. Do they sort of pander to their radical base, or do they go back to the wishes of their broader base? That's why we can win on this, Jay. That's why we say, we're going to have a lot of disagreements, but you've got to dig in, you've got to fight, you've got to play defense. Jay, sometimes playing defense, you get offensive wins as well, and that's what today is.
Yeah, let me read to you what the State Department, this is under President Biden, what they've said. Listen.
As we have said, has no jurisdiction over this matter. Israel is not a party to the ICC. And it has not consented to the court's jurisdiction. And we have serious concerns about the ICC's attempts to exercise its jurisdiction over Israeli personnel.
This is a very big development and a really positive development. But let's go through the statement. I want to get everybody's attention to turn to the statement that was issued by the State Department. I think we need to break it down for everybody. This is really important, folks. If you're concerned about the Middle East, if you're concerned about Israel, this is a big deal. And this was a very good development. Look, we told you early on, when we disagreed with the administration, we're going to be loud and clear. And boy, we have been. We also told you when we think they do something they get right, we're going to say it. Well, this one looks like they got it right, based on what the statements are. Let me read it to you. This is the first part. Today, this is from Anthony Blinken. He is the Secretary of State, Secretary Blinken. Today, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, whose term ends in June, which is interesting because she could have waited for this and given it to the next prosecutor, which would be normal, Andy, when you're in the last 3 months.
Yes,
you're a prosecutor.
Yeah, you wait until you'd give it to your successor, who is Khan, a Pakistani but a British-trained lawyer. But boy, Fatou Bensouda, the current prosecutor, couldn't wait. She was so interested.
So her term ends in June. The fact that the Secretary of State pointed that out, I thought was very good. Then it says they confirmed the opening of an investigation into the Palestinian situation. The United States firmly opposes and is deeply disappointed by this decision. The ICC has no jurisdiction over the matter. Israel is not a party to the ICC and has not consented to the court's jurisdiction. And we have serious concerns about the ICC's attempts to exercise its jurisdictions over Israeli personnel. Wes, we've got to hit that again.
Yeah, absolutely. This, if they were to go forward with this and succeed with this, it means that individual Israeli citizens and especially individual Israeli soldiers could be, if they're traveling, be arrested and taken to the Hague or wherever it is, ICC in the Hague, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, taken there and put on trial.
No, that's what they do. We've done it.
Yes.
I mean, we've done a trial at the Hague. We know what it's like. But then read this next one. I'm going to read this next one for everybody. The Palestinians, well, actually, it's They talk about jurisdiction, then they talk about the Palestinians. This is their words, folks. So don't cancel us out here. I'm just reading what the State Department said. The Palestinians do not qualify as a sovereign state. Now let me read you that again. The Palestinians do not qualify as a sovereign state and therefore are not qualified to obtain membership as a state, to participate as a state in, or delegate jurisdiction to the ICC. That is what we've been arguing. There is a process for Palestinian statehood as part of the original two-state solution. It never happened. No one has recognized Palestinian territory as a separate state. They can't function as a separate state. They don't have an operating government as a separate state. Everybody knows this. But a group of judges, unelected, of course, made that decision at the ICC, kind of, and then this prosecutor decided to take it full tilt.
Jay, let me make two quick comments. First of all, on the jurisdiction issue, look, this is an argument we've been making for a long time, and Israel's a sovereign state. By the way, so is the United States, and the same arguments will be made at the ICC over the United States. So protecting Israel's sovereignty, absolutely critical. But on this issue of whether or not Palestine is a state, Jay, let me tell people another reason why this is so significant, because one of the things that we were the most concerned about at the end of the Obama administration is that administration walked away from these issues at the United Nations Security Council. Jay, with the U.S. State Department now saying that the Palestinians do not qualify as a sovereign state and making that part of their official statement,
that's huge.
When we've got to go back to the Security Council on those other issues, Jay, how are they going to walk away from that? I would think the United States would have to now reassert their veto at the Security Council, something the Obama administration walked away from. Big statement there.
But that's the next step of what we need to see happen here, and that is what takes place now. We're going to go through the rest of the statements. Very, very important to understand this. But then there's going to be the UN activity. And Wes has some interesting statistics, and not good statistics, but not surprising from the United Nations.
Yeah, over the last 2 decades, there have been more UN resolutions passed against the state of Israel than any other country in the world, all 192 nations that are part of the UN. But, Jay, last year alone, there were 17 anti-Israel resolutions passed in the United Nations. Meanwhile, how many resolutions were passed against Syria? 1. Against North Korea? 1. Against Iran? 1. But 17 in last year alone passed against Israel. There are real atrocities being committed. There are real war crimes out there. They're not being committed in the nation of Israel. And the other thing, too, the ICC was established as a sort of a court of last resort so that countries that do not have an impartial functioning judicial system, that's where they can go for relief.
Yep.
Israel falls into the same category as the United States. They have a judicial
system.
Yes, exactly.
The United States remains deeply committed to ensuring justice and accountability for international atrocity crimes. We recognize the role that the international tribunals, such as the ICC, can play within their respective mandates in the pursuit of those important objectives. And it talks about why the ICC was established. Those limits on the court's mandate, though, are rooted in fundamental principles of international law and must be respected. Now, I read that provision, Andy, because the United States is now acknowledging, because, look, this same prosecutor is trying to bring an investigation against U.S. soldiers because of Afghanistan. We were at the ICC litigating that, okay, at The Hague 14 months ago. Litigating that very issue. So this is not new in one sense, but it's important to understand what I think the United States is setting up here, Andy, and that is this putting the jurisdictional limitation in place so that they cannot now go after the United States.
That's right. There is a principle in international law known as complementarity, and that means that international tribunals defer, to the jurisdictional courts of a particular state when those states have world-class judicial systems, as Israel does, So Israel has the capacity within it to investigate war crimes if they were committed by Israelis or by whomever is in their territoriality. Therefore, it has no business, the ICC prosecutor doesn't have any business interfering where there is the capacity on the part of Israel to investigate itself and to take action against these people that have committed war crimes within its borders or within its jurisdiction. And that's an important principle of international law that Secretary Blinken pointed out. In other words, ICC, stay out of Israel because Israel has the capacity to investigate and determine the liability and culpability of people itself.
Carol from YouTube asked this: if Israel doesn't fall under the jurisdiction of the ICC, what's their argument over the alleged crimes? Carol, you're 100% correct. And that's exactly what is said in the statement, and that is the ICC, I'm reading the statement again from the Secretary of State, has no jurisdiction over this matter. Israel's not a member of the Rome Statute, which is what you have to sign on to be part of the ICC, nor is the United States, nor is China, nor is Russia. I could list a whole lot of the big G5s that aren't. Now, what's the plan here? Hopefully this is a positive sign. We're going to get into what all of that means. But you need to understand this. Your voice made a difference here. Our work at the ACLJ made a difference here. Our ability to come to you each and every day on this broadcast, live, on radio, TV, multiple social media platforms, makes a huge difference. The ability for Than's team in Washington to talk with members of the House and Senate. So we want to encourage you to support the work of the ACLJ, especially this month as we're in a matching challenge campaign. Go to aclj.org, and any amount you donate, we're going to get a matching gift from somebody else for. aclj.org. Do it today. Listen to this also from the Secretary of State. If you're just joining us, the State Department's come out in support of Israel on this ICE move by the International Criminal Court. This is huge. Moreover, the United States believes a peaceful, secure, and more prosperous future for the people of the Middle East depends on building bridges and creating new avenues of dialogue and exchange, not unilateral judicial actions that exasperate tensions and undercut efforts to advance a negotiated two-state solution. We will continue to uphold our strong commitment to Israel and its security, including by opposing actions that seek to target Israel unfairly. Harry, that is from a policy standpoint alone here, this statement out of the State Department is very, very strong and very positive.
Absolutely. And in some sense, it's a very surprising decision, but a highly welcome decision. This decision by the Secretary of State ultimately benefits not only Israel, but it benefits the United States, because the United States is also in the crosshairs of the ICC. And I think Wesley has correctly pointed out that the ICC, the United Nations, have disproportionately targeted Israel. This is the first step in a process of disproportionately targeting the United States and any rule of law country. And so I think it's very, very important to note that the Biden administration has correctly pushed back against this outrageous decision by the outgoing ICC prosecutor. And I think it is clear beyond question that the decision by the ICC prosecutor makes little sense, because the ICC has zero jurisdiction over a sovereign country unless and until it accepts jurisdiction and becomes a party to the ICC. It's clear beyond question that Israel is not a party. It's clear beyond question that the United States is not a party to the ICC. They are without jurisdiction.
Listen to what Benjamin Netanyahu had to say about the ICC.
Who do they put on investigation? Israel. They don't put on Syria, where the Assad regime has butchered over 500,000 people, or Iran, that every Monday and Wednesday commits these horrible war crimes. This is pure anti-Semitism. This is a perversion of justice. This is something that happens to us today, but tomorrow it'll happen to you. In fact, your soldiers are they're thinking about investigating your soldiers. So this is an affront to all democracies, and everyone should stand together.
I'm going to take you inside the ICC. You're not going to get this anywhere else. I'm going to take you inside the International Criminal Court. If you're listening, you'll be able to hear it on radio. If you're watching, you're going to be able to see it. This was a case involving the United States, but it was the same issue of jurisdiction. And I was there as chief counsel for the European Center for Law and Justice. Let's go inside The Hague.
The European Center for Law and Justice. You have 10 minutes. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President, Your Honors, and may it please the Chamber. I'm here today on behalf of the European Center for Law and Justice. The first question before this Chamber is whether the pretrial chamber's assessments under Article 53(1)(c) are jurisdictional for the purpose of Article 82(1)(a). The answer to that question is yes. The availability of a separate appeal procedure on preliminary issues, such as jurisdiction and admissibility, as distinct from appeals on convictions or acquittals, is, in our view, crucial to the efficient functioning of this court, as well as the interest of justice, as highlighted in this very case. The prosecutor here was attempting to press ahead against nationals of a non-cooperative, non-state party ex parte, without any opportunity for that state's legitimate objections to jurisdiction to be considered. And the pretrial chamber reached the impugned decision on relevant matters under Article 15
including the interest of justice, without fully considering the critical information about jurisdiction and admissibility. In the case of the United States, for example, these threshold objections would include, first, the principle of customary international law, second, the existence of specific treaties between the United States and the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, giving the United States exclusive jurisdiction over its personnel, and finally, the principle of complementarity, because the United States is demonstrably both willing and able to investigate and prosecute its own cases.
I'm here to ask you to support the work of the ACLJ, to be part of our matching challenge. Double the impact of your donation right now at aclj.org.
Well, there you go. You were inside the ICC. And, Andy, we knew we were not going to win that case because there's no way you're going to win it. But we laid down the line. We laid down the markers on this.
That's true. That's true. You don't. The United States and Israel does not win before the ICC. It's not. It doesn't happen. But you make it very clear, as you say, you lay down the markers, and by simply saying to them, there are principles of international law, customary international law, the rule of complementarity that really says to you, International Criminal Court prosecutor, stay out of these things. Well, that's not what happened. The prosecutor was determined. She is determined to put Israel on trial, as the Prime Minister of Israel said. This is backwards from what it should be, because this was the nation that was found as the consequence of war crimes that were committed, and yet now it's being investigated as a war crime committer. How ridiculous is that?
Unbelievably so. Probably has the best complementary system. Not probably has the best complementary system in the Middle East.
No doubt.
Legal system. I mean, this is a total farce. But having said that, then, back on the governmental affairs side, people spoke out. We spoke out. You spoke out with your teams. And we got a good result here from the State Department under Joe Biden. I never would have thought I'd said that.
Jay, I think this is a great example of how we have said so many times, just because the deck is stacked against us, and it's going to be stacked against us in a lot of different venues at a lot of different times, but that doesn't mean you don't show up. And you show up and you make the right argument so that one day you will carry the day. And Jay, that's true at the ICC. It's true at the United Nations. It's true an awful lot right now in Washington, D.C. I'll tell you that right now. A number of issues we're working on today. The deck is stacked against us, but you make the right argument anyway, because at the end of the day, Jay, you can convince the American people that your argument is correct, and ultimately that can have sway on the people that they elect, even if they don't see the world the same way we do.
But you need to understand that this is an attack aimed at, I keep saying this, it's not just, it's at the soldiers. Israeli soldiers because of the Palestinian territory, the United States, Afghanistan. Wes?
Yeah, absolutely. This is directed not towards, putting sanctions on a country or something like that. This is designed to target individual people for atrocities and war crimes, and in this case, that would mean individual Israeli citizens and especially Israeli soldiers. The effect of this also, Jay, which I find very disconcerting, is that what this does implicitly is that it sort of rewards the Palestinians' support of terror and their intransigence on peace, and what this will end up doing is pushing the Palestinians further away from any real negotiations.
Well, what's working is the Abraham Accords. And the Palestinians didn't like that either. The Iranians certainly did not. But, Harry, the Palestinians didn't like it either, because they thought they would always be the stumbling block to getting legal recognition for Israel by the majority Muslim Arab countries. And that's been put away.
Absolutely. So I think President Trump has done at least two very powerful things to strengthen Israel. First, to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of the country, and secondly, has produced the so-called Abraham Accords, which strengthens Israel's relationship with moderate Arab countries. I think it's also important to point out that the Secretary of State's decision here to come out strongly in favor of Israel also notes something that is hugely important, and that is that that the Palestinians do not possess a sovereign state, and as such, they cannot be members of the ICC. And it's important to note that the decision by the prosecutor here was done to do what? It was designed to reward, as Wesley correctly points out, a supporter of terror which is not a sovereign state.
We have a petition up at ACLJ.org that has 153,745 signatures. Defend Israel from legal warfare at the ICC, and that's what it is. And this is where we need your support. We're in a matching challenge campaign. Go to ACLJ.org. Any amount you donate, we're going to get a matching gift. Make that donation. It will be matched.